We are exactly 7 months from the Iowa caucuses. Can't wait, right? But it may as well be tomorrow as far as some of the Democratic candidates are concerned. It'll be a packed house for the holiday. 7 of them are now either there or on their way to the Hawkeye State. And here's what they are dealing with there, from a polling perspective at least. New results from the USA Today and Suffolk reflecting what many of the national polls have started to hint at. Joe Biden's grip on the lead slowly fading away thanks to a surge of support for Kamala Harris and Elizabeth Warren, fresh off last week's Democratic debates. Joining us now, MSNBC correspondent Garrett Haake, who is down in Iowa, where many of the candidates are campaigning today. Garrett, give us the lay of the land there. We know we'll see Joe Biden, Kamala Harris is there, Amy Klobuchar. This is sort of a convergence where a lot of, frankly, the voters there say, even if they've expressed themselves in polls, a lot of them haven't formally made up their mind yet. They say they could still change their mind in this race.
Yeah, look, Peter, I don't have to tell you, Iowa decides late, but it is so important, especially in a field this big, because you have to think there's only going to be so many tickets that get punched out of the Hawkeye State. You know, I imagine this field will likely be a lot smaller as we get a little bit closer to the caucuses. 7 months is starting to make my head spin when you say it like that. When you look at the people who are here, it's actually interesting because it is candidates by and large who have not spent quite as much time here. As that top tier has solidified into a top 4 or 5, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Mayor Pete are sort of 3 of those who have not spent a ton of time in the Hawkeye State, but they are all here right now, trying to essentially establish themselves on the ground here and translate national polling support into the kind of grassroots support you need to win in a caucus state. So I'm watching these Joe Biden events very closely over the next couple of days. He also has had to face questions about whether he can still do the kind of fast-paced, on-the-ground, heavily retail-based campaigning that is so necessary here. Likewise, Kamala Harris has had a bit of a reputation in Iowa as someone who's flown in and out. She's done 1 or 2 events. She's not had as big of a staff on the ground. So she's trying to show a little bit of muscle here in the Hawkeye State as well. Pete Buttigieg has 1 event here tonight. He's marching in a parade tomorrow. Again, another example of a candidate who has a big national presence, but isn't on the ground as much as Bernie Sanders, Amy Klobuchar, Beto O'Rourke. Some of these other candidates, Steve Bullock has basically moved to Iowa, setting up shop here, trying to move the numbers through retail. So we're seeing that the national frontrunners sort of do this backwards. When we're used to seeing a candidate build and build and build in Iowa, we're now seeing national frontrunners come into Iowa and use the support they have already gotten nationally to try to build a grassroots campaign.
Garrett, I'm curious if you've sort of seen any shift in the course of the last several days since you've been back in Iowa now, post-debate, post the sort of watershed breakout moment, at least for Kamala Harris. In the conversations you have as you attend these events there, have you sort of seen a shift in the way that some of the voters there, the caucus goers there, discuss this?
Yeah, I mean, the Kamala Harris sort of mini boomlet here is really interesting. What I can't tell yet is whether it's a sugar high or whether it's the kind of thing that can really sustain her. We've talked for weeks now about how Joe Biden has benefited so much from being the only candidate in this massive field who Democratic primary voters feel like they really know. And now all of a sudden there is this surge of interest in Kamala Harris. People are talking about her a bit more. They saw on stage what Harris and her supporters have always said is sort of what she would do against Donald Trump. I mean, they saw her essentially punch the big guy in the fight. And a lot of Democrats that I talk to say, oh, okay, well, I saw her do this with Joe Biden. Maybe she can actually do this with Donald Trump. So it's drawn a lot of attention. The question that I don't know the answer to yet, that I'm really curious about, is whether she will have the same trajectory that we saw with Beto O'Rourke when he got into the race, got a ton of attention, fell off very quickly. Mayor Pete got into the race, got a ton of attention, still has the big fundraising numbers, but his poll numbers have fallen off too. Will Kamala Harris be the next person to rise and fall, or can she sustain this in a way that none of the other Biden alternatives have yet?
And Garrett, this raises questions about electability as well. A lot of Democrats right now, obviously their top priority is defeating Donald Trump, but there are real concerns as it relates to the electability potentially of Kamala Harris or Elizabeth Warren. The New York Times' Lisa Lair writes about this. She says privately, Democratic strategists, candidates and officials say they've been alarmed by how deeply doubts about female electability have taken hold. In polling, interviews and focus groups, a portion of the party's voters suggest they're eager to see a woman on the ticket, but fear that putting her her in the top slot could cost them the White House again. The question comes up frequently in early primary states, including at events organized by female voters. Heidi, to you on this. What struck me is a lot of people watched that second debate, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and said they could imagine Kamala Harris on the stage punching Trump in the nose, so to speak. But Hillary Clinton did a pretty good job in her debates with President Trump. That didn't change things. What do you make of this concern about a female candidate's electability right now?
It's something that you hear, and it's something that you actually hear from even female Democrats, and that's how you know that it's a real thing. And it's hard to separate out how much of that is just PTSD from what happened with Hillary Clinton's campaign. You saw so many of them women were so passionate and so upset that they jumped on buses from every corner of this country and came here for the Women's March. But I think that there is definitely some soft data that illustrates the challenge here. And it's hard because the men have the name ID, right? Biden and Sanders. So you can just say, like, a lot of that is name ID. But even so, 538 took a look at this and found that a lot of the women candidates got more negative coverage coming out. They found it harder to break through, even when you're talking about so-called equals like Mayor Pete and Beto O'Rourke. So there is some soft data there. And if you want to just get into a pure discussion about to what extent does sexism still pervade our society, I did look at this issue because, you know, after following Hillary Clinton's campaign, I think a lot of us did, and found some really interesting poll figures. Now, you could argue these are people who would never vote Democrat anyway, and the candidate would be a Democratic candidate. Yep. But Perry Undum, which is a polling firm, took a look at this and found that 1/4 of male Trump voters said that men make better leaders, and an even higher percentage, almost 40%, said, it really doesn't make any difference. It doesn't make anything better to have women in positions of power. So that is something that's out there still in our culture.
Well, to be fair, it's likely that those Trump voters aren't going to come around to the Democrat, whoever they are. The question is about those sort of independents in the middle, if they'd be willing to do it, Mark, right now. And anecdotally, you talk to people and they say, Kamala Harris, we love her. We think she'd be a great number 2. Often.
You do. It is amazing how not only have people selected who they think most electable candidate would be, they're also selected his or her running mate. It's amazing how they're doing everyone's work for them. Look, we have had just this sort of rampant flavor of the monthism among, Mayor Pete, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris now. People have just had a lot of moments. I mean, Joe Biden, there were those gaudy numbers about him head-to-head with President Trump, which I think is still probably his strongest asset. The fact is that there are probably about 4 or 5, maybe 6 candidates now that do seem to have some staying power, a combination of their name recognition, the money they've raised, or wherever they sort of sit in the lane, sort of infrastructure of all this. And I think eventually they do remind you that this is a long game, and it is just July. I mean, I know it does feel like, the caucus could be next week, but it is just July. There's like 7 million debates between now and February, and there's just a lot of stuff that just needs to settle.
Well, as we're talking about the female candidates right now, we just heard from Kamala Harris. She is in Iowa, as we noted today. And here's part of what she said as it relates to prosecuting the case against the president. Take a listen.
I know predators, and we have a predator living in the White House. And let me tell you, there's a little secret about predators. Donald Trump has predatory nature and predatory instincts. And the thing about predators you should know is that they prey on the vulnerable. They prey on those who they do not believe are strong. And the thing about predators you must most importantly know, predators are cowards. Predators are cowards. And so when we look at this campaign and we look at the task before us, it will be to successfully prosecute the case against 4 more years of Donald Trump, and I am prepared to do that.
The former Attorney General of the state of California, now the senator from that state. You just heard her speaking in Iowa today. Doug, the prosecuting the case point, as I was making earlier, it's not, if you don't feel like the case has been sufficiently prosecuted to this point, right, then I don't know, it's not clear that prosecuting any further is going to help you. But that message is really about sort of juicing the base, right? Motivating those base supporters just to lift the numbers to do the opposite, or to do exactly what the Trump supporters are trying to do on the other side, isn't it?
Yeah, right. And, I agree with everything that Kamala Harris said. And I think what I was disappointed about the debates was that you didn't see Democrats go that hard against the president. The first night, everyone was
barely mentioned.
First night, barely mentioned. Second night was all about this sort of internal conflict. Democrats need need to prosecute this case against the president in a way that I think Kamala did there. We hear it on the trail more, but you didn't see it in the debate. And we had 17, 18 million people watching those debates.
Yeah.
And this was a great opportunity for Democrats to define what this race is going to be about and what this president is about. And I think we missed that opportunity, unfortunately.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.